Plants, the green frontier. These are the discussions of the podcast Horticult. Its continuing mission to talk about strange new cultivars, to seek out new flowers and plant them, to boldly garden like no one has before. Hey, this is Blaine from the Horticult. What's up, everybody? So today's episode is number 55, How Trees Move Water. So me and Brad just get into how water's uptaken into the trees through feeder roots, how it gets dispersed, what the cambium layer is, evapotranspiration, osmosis, how stomata and lenticels can help, and then ways to watch overwatering, underwatering, how the plant reacts to those things. Wilting is a way that shows it's in water stress. Thanks so much. Let's get it on. This is Beef Lane.
And this is B-Rad.
And we are the Horticult. Thank you for coming along for the ride. Our special topic for this evening, we will be talking about how trees move water.
We are going to get deep into the soil with the roots.
We are. We're going to be rolling in the deep. So the first thing I think about when I think about trees moving water, okay, water has to be accessible to the root system.
Okay.
So you have those little itty bitty rooties on the fuzzy roots on the roots. So they're like little fuzzy hairs on the roots that actually uptake the water. So once it gets into the system, how does it get to the top?
So, but if you talk about getting into the system, I mean that's some pretty intense science all in itself, right? So there's a greater amount of potassium in the roots, in the feeder roots. And if there's ample amounts of water in the soil surrounding area, then it creates an imbalance. And that water is going to so nature tries to balance itself out, right? So water is going to pass through those cells to then balance out that potassium.
So that's that membrane.
Uh-huh.
So it keeps it from being balanced, and it's able to move the water to the unbalanced part.
That's right.
To try to,
equalize.
Equalize. I was just trying to think of another word.
Equilibrium, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, so then there's the same amount of salts in the soil as there is in the root beyond the membrane.
So this is basically one of the main reasons why soil, being salty soil in particular, is hard for plants to exist in salty soil, because they're not able to overcome the salinity to move water into the system.
Yeah, and in fact, in some ways, then if there's more, I think of clear water, but that's not the term. Unsalty water would then want to go back through that membrane and out of the plant, and that's counterintuitive to like. So it's actually sucking
production. It out instead of bringing it up, because it just can't overcome the level of salt to make the balance. It's reverse.
Mm-hmm.
That's so crazy.
Yeah, it is cool, crazy. So once it gets into the root system, then osmosis, the polarity between that molecule of H2O kicks into gear, and it's that water is then able to hold on to each other. Those molecules are able to hold on to each other, and through the process of evapotranspiration, meaning the water, the H2O, is evaporating out of the leaves and probably the bark, the lenticels on the bark, those are like little air pockets that exist on tree trunks, and anyway, you get the gist. So you've got these little air holes, the stomata and the lenticels, that can open and close, and which then allows the evapotranspiration, so the water to move out of the plant. And it's usually up in the upper canopy. Well, it's throughout the entire plant itself, but anyway, I envision this vapor and humidity and everything to just kind of be traveling upwards from the root to the top of the canopy of the tree and shrub and plant. Anyway.
Yeah. So it's like, the thing you got to think about too is that the only real living part of the plant that has the nutrients flowing through it is the little ring, the little, almost like a few cells wide in between the bark and the heartwood, and that's called the cambium, and that's where so it's like a little straw that is like a few cells wide, pulling up through, and that's how the thinner the straw, it's easier to pull up. That's how I think of it. It's this from the tip of the roots all the way to the top of the tree. That's just all around the entire green area, and so you could break the bark and see that green cambium layer. And that is the living part of the tree. If you kill the cambium, you kill the tree. I saw this on, I watch a lot of Alaska: The Last Frontier, and he was harvesting trees. And he's like, there's not very many dead trees in this area, so we got to cut around the tree, cut the cambium layer, and then next year we'll have some trees that we can use for harvesting, for wood. Because you don't want them to lay down or they'll rot, so you want them to stand up. But that's all you have to do to kill a tree, is you make that. You just have to break it all the way around. How trees can survive damage is it doesn't go completely around the cambium and cutting off the roots from the upper canopy.
Mm-hmm.
And some trees can recover by shooting up from the root system below the cut line or whatever.
Like suckering
and stuff. It's kind of the last resort of the tree to get the energy it needs.
Yeah, that's a great analogy, using the straw as the trunk, where the inner part of the straw, so the plastic part of the straw is the cambium, and the inner part of the straw is the xylem, which is the water flow that we were talking about from the root system up to the top of the canopy. Yeah, that's a great way to look at that. I did have a thought as far as the drier the air, the more nature tries to balance itself out, and it will pull the water through the tree or the shrub out into the atmosphere and the surrounding environment of that plant. The more humid it is, the less that it transpires.
Well, I know the coastal redwoods, they get most of even though they're basically in a rainforest, they get most of their moisture in the upper canopy through the fog. So they actually absorb it from the air
into the stomata and or the lenticels.
Yeah.
Interesting.
So that's how, and they were saying because of the warming up in those areas, the fog isn't as good, and the trees are struggling, and they're having a harder time because of there's less fog. There might be as much rain. They might have the same annual rainfall, but they got to keep cool up in that high elevation.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's just harder for them to move the water too, since it's so high.
Yeah.
But really, that's the thing. There's no muscles happening. We say pull, but it's really the water. The plant is manipulating the water, the properties that water has, I should say. Because you said they the molecules hold together. We call that adhesion. And then they also like to stick to other things, which is cohesion. Oh wait, maybe I mixed those up. Cohesion and adhesion.
So I believe it's the same thing. It's cohesive. Yeah.
So it's they like to hold to each other, and then that's why droplets will pool together.
Mm-hmm.
Because it's almost. Mercury is a very, higher level of this
polarity,
happening.
This cohesion.
And so it's like they're coming together to pool because they want to be together, and then they also will stick to things like, a water droplet rolling down your windshield or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
So it's like it's not bouncing off; it hits it and sticks, but it stays together. Mm-hmm. So it's like those two properties by itself, the trees are able to manipulate that and how water wants to balance itself. And I consider that one osmosis.
That term, and it's
because there was a crazy experiment we did in school. Where I mean, they showed it in the books.
Hydrophilic and hydrophobic, and
with the membrane and all that, and they put it was like a tube of water, like a plastic tube of water that had the membrane in the middle. You hold it to a U, so one hand is holding one end of it and the other hand is holding the other. And you fill it with water, and you have the membrane in the middle at the bottom of the U, and then they poured some solvent in one side, so like salt or sugar or whatever that would dissolve in water. And then the water actually collected heavier crossing, because you think water is going to balance, and it was almost probably 2/3 down on the no solvent side, and it all came up to try to balance. And where it kind of stopped was the amount of gravity. So if it was thinner, if it was a thinner tube, it would have been able to just suck all that water on the other side of the membrane. So that's why I was thinking that with the straw too.
The thinner it is, the more pressure you can achieve.
Generate, yeah.
Yeah.
And then those trees are just, because it's only a few cells wide, can just suck it. Yeah. I mean, they're not sucking it. That's the thing. Water is doing it. They're using those chemicals or whatever, the solvents in the tree. So like the sodium, I guess that is salt. I mean,
yeah, for sure.
Different
potassium.
Mm-hmm. Those things are what the water is trying to balance out. The tree can manipulate where the solvents are located. It's not just in the root. I mean, they do store a lot of it in the root, but I think that's one thing they can move up and down the phloem
are the salts and
the potassium,
fertilizer,
the
nutrients. Yeah.
It's
well,
crazy.
and inside of that tree or shrub is, all of that water is reaching every single cell, right? And building new cells. And so there's like this network or matrix of all of these little vessels where the water is then distributed out through the branches and the twigs and stems and all the way out to the leaves.
Mm.
And
what I think is cool too is like how a tree can cut off the leaves if it's stressed.
Mm-hmm.
Like that's a sign of stress. Cuts the leaves off and is able to hold on to the water. But then also, as that stress is relieving, the wilt happens, but after a certain time, if it's able to get enough water, it'll just bounce right back. That's what I think is really cool about perennials, the herbaceous perennials, because you can see it happening. It's a lot harder to see that in a tree,
mm-hmm.
where it's like, because it's so big, it's already absorbing and all these things, and it hardly ever, well, I shouldn't say hardly ever runs out, but it can run out. But with like a herbaceous perennial, that whole thing just blonk.
Kind of wilts down, and that's actually an adaptation to plants, some plants, where when they do wilt and fold in like that when it's hot, it closes the stomata, and it just slows that evapotranspiration down considerably to the point where it holds on to what it has until the nighttime, and it's able to rehydrate, become turgid again, and it opens back up, and is able to photosynthesize properly. But yeah, when it gets to a wilting stage, it also drops off the photosynthetic capacity. So everything kind of, in a way, kind of shuts down, goes dormant, You hear about dormancy going in the cold periods.